Hey everyone, it's Simone here again from Leap. So if you want to do a quick Google search, as one of my clients did, you would find that gluten is actually a group of proteins that are commonly found in grains, obviously most commonly wheat, as most of us are aware of, or derivatives of wheat. And the main benefit of gluten in regards to baked goods and breads is that it gives breads their elasticity. It also gives them their chewiness and their fluffiness, and most of you would know that if you were to try a gluten-free bread, generally it's quite dense and not that sort of same texture. So for me to explain what happens to your body when you ingest gluten, I need to go back to basic digestion biology. Once it reaches our small intestines, this is where the absorption of nutrients occurs. So the lining of our small intestines is actually 1 cell thick. These cells are formed in the shape of finger-like projections, so little shags, known as microvilli, and this is where the absorptions of nutrients occurs from the small intestine into your bloodstream. So say, if we're talking about proteins, for those of you who have done basic biology, you would know that the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. So 2 amino acids put together is a peptide. Lots of peptides put together are polypeptides. Then you get these polypeptide chains, and then the polypeptide chains intertwine together to then make a 3D protein molecule, and that's essentially how protein's formed. And so that will get broken down to the single amino acids, and then the amino acids are small enough to fit through the channels of those microvilli to then go into the bloodstream to be used wherever it needs to be. So, amino acids would be taken to the skeletal muscles to actually build up the size of your skeletal muscles and be functional in that role. So what actually happens then when we digest gluten, which we've said is a protein, is for someone who is gluten sensitive, as soon as it gets into the small intestine, your body regards it as foreign. So what happens is it will elicit an immune response. So the first point of call is we produce what's called interleukins. These interleukins then produce cytokines, and then they'll go out and attack the gluten to try and destroy it to get out of the body. Generally, this isn't enough, however, so then we need to call in, the next point of call, which is, say, our army, which is known as antibodies. So for those of you who have had a vaccine before or are aware of how vaccines work, what happens is you'll be injected with a dead disease, virus, bacteria, with their corresponding antigen. And then our body, in a safe environment, because the disease is dormant, it's not going to affect you, will produce the corresponding antibody to then attach onto it, fight it, destroy it. So the same thing happens in this circumstance. Proteins have their own antigens, gluten will have its own antigens, and then the antibodies have to be formed to then attack the gluten. So this is essentially what happens. And a lot of people think that's where it all ends, like that's it. So they think, yep, if you're sensitive to gluten, your body's going to produce an immune response. You therefore get inflammation in your gut. That makes you get these yuck tummy symptoms. If you cut out gluten, you'll then stop getting stomach symptoms, and that's it, problem solved. It's a little bit more complex than that, because when you ingest gluten, and interestingly, this is what happens when you ingest gluten, whether you are sensitive to gluten or not. Some of you might have heard of leaky gut. So what actually happens is when we ingest gluten, an enzyme which controls the permeability of these microvilli increases. It's called zonulin. And so what happens is zonulin increases the permeability of the small intestine. So like I was saying before, amino acids, or the substrates of any food. So for carbohydrates, it would be glucose, and for milk, it would be just a small, not milk, sorry. For fats, it would be fatty acids, free fatty acids. Generally, nothing bigger than the single substrates can actually fit into the pores of the microvilli, the transport molecules in the microvilli, the channels. So what then happens is when there's increased permeability, that can actually occur. So when you're gluten sensitive, you can no longer break gluten down, those big proteins down into its substrates. You can't break them down to the single amino acids. Your body isn't able to. So what happens is with this increased permeability, these undigested gluten molecules, these gluten proteins, then go into your bloodstream, and obviously the antibodies need to then fight elsewhere in the body. So this inflammation process is now not just happening in your gut, but everywhere. And then so more inflammation is happening in your whole body, and that's when you can start getting symptoms not just in your gut, but it can affect your skin, other organs as well. And not only that occurs, but what can also happen is, some of you might be aware of, or have like experienced it yourself, or have heard of people developing intolerances to foods which they never had before, and they're quite weird. So it's things like they'll get allergic to broccoli, or they get allergic to tomato or mushrooms. And so what actually happens is, with the increased permeability of the microvilli, undigested proteins, like I said, gluten can get through the bloodstream, and then other foods which are undigested can also get through the bloodstream. So let's say tomatoes. So tomatoes are being broken down. They haven't actually gone down to their single substrates. They're becoming, as a clump, going in through the bloodstream. And once it goes in through the bloodstream, it's not regarded as food anymore. It's regarded as a pathogen which your body doesn't recognize. So your body then produces antibodies to fight the undigested tomato. And then when you go to ingest it as a food again, your body then regards it as a pathogen, which instead of going through your bloodstream has gone into your body via, orally. And then it goes to attack it again. So then you're getting reaction not only to gluten, but to other substances which your body has become, allergic to because of the gluten in the first place. Not only that happens, you also get what's called cross-reactivity. So there are a lot of different foods that look very similar to the structure of gluten. So the major culprits are coffee, milk chocolate, casein, which is the protein within milk. Also, even though they're technically gluten-free, rice and buckwheat also can have a cross-reactivity with gluten. So what that means is, when you ingest gluten, because it's structurally and genetically similar to gluten, your body still associates it with being gluten. So when you ingest those foods, your body then goes attacks it again, and then you then start getting allergic reactions and immune responses to these foods as well. So this whole cascade of events all happens just from ingesting gluten. One other thing that also happens, a lot of you may have heard that gluten can be the cause of diseases such as osteoporosis, dementia, other neurological degenerative diseases such as like multiple sclerosis, can then affect, heart, you can get cancer, all those things due to gluten. And the reason why this happens is because, and autoimmune diseases especially, the reason why this happens is, once the gluten molecules then go into your bloodstream, like I was saying before, they are undigested proteins, your body can't digest them, they then go into the bloodstream, and they're chains of peptides, polypeptides, and these sequences of polypeptides, because every protein has their own individual sequence of amino acids, gluten can look very similar to human tissue within the body, and what they've known is a specific type of gluten, because like I said, it's a group of proteins. One specific clump of gluten that goes into the bloodstream when you're sensitive to gluten looks a lot like human thyroid tissue. So then what happens is, your body, thinking that the human thyroid tissue is gluten, then starts attacking the thyroid tissue, and that's what's leading to autoimmune diseases, where your body actually starts attacking itself and breaking down its own tissue. And all that is coming from the ingestion of gluten. So it is more than just symptoms in the gut and inflammation resulting within the gut. It can spread throughout your whole body. So it's a pretty big deal if you're sensitive to gluten. So that is it for today. Like I said, in my next video, I'm going to be talking about what happens when you ingest gluten, even if you're not sensitive to gluten. So even if you're not eliciting an immune response from gluten. And then talking about why gluten sensitivity is so prevalent in today's society. So again, want this to be as interactive as possible. So any questions about today's topic, please comment on the video, get in touch with me on Facebook, any other way you need to. And yeah, feel free to ask your questions. Thanks guys, see you soon.